And hello and welcome into another edition of Battery Power TV. The winter meetings have come and gone, and now it's time to unpack our bags and unpack the moves that Alex Anthopoulos and the Braves made, headlined, of course, by acquiring Jarred Kelenic to fill that left field vacancy for Atlanta. Before we get into that, as always, I'm Grant McCauley alongside Chris Willis for another edition of BPTV. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button, enable those alerts so you get notified every time we do something here on the channel. And Chris, of course, we saw late on Sunday night, before the meetings even really got started and got going, we got an alert about another Braves trade, one that we didn't see or even hear coming.
No, you're right. It was a little surprising. I mean, when we went through the scenarios about fixing left field, we didn't really think about him trading for a former top prospect with 5 years of team control, and taking on a bunch of money to do so. So, it's a very intriguing move, I thought.
Yeah, well, everybody, I think, knows by now, unless you've kind of been hibernating, if you will, for the last week, which, the winter meetings, I think there's a lot of conversation about what could happen there, what actually does happen there, as we just found out, is kind of subject to how motivated teams are and, of course, how motivated players are to find a new home. But as far as trades are concerned, Alex Anthopoulos always seems to be looking for those and motivated to pull one off if it makes his club better. But the Jarred Kelenic deal, which is a 5-player trade, as Seattle sent over Marco Gonzalez and Evan White as well. That's the salary component that Chris just mentioned, $29 million worth to be exact. Jackson Kowar, who was just picked up from Kansas City in the Kyle Wright trade, sent to Seattle along with Cole Phillips, a second-round draftee in 2022, is yet to make his professional debut thanks to an injury. But Chris, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. It was more about getting somebody, a controllable outfielder with a lot of talent in Jarred Kelenic, taking on the money to do so, and a lot less about what the Braves were giving up in this trade.
Yeah, I mean, Kelenic, he it seems like he's been up forever now. It wasn't that long ago he was a top prospect. He obviously hasn't realized his potential, but he's still just 24 years old. Got a lot of team control left, and he's just tooled out type of player. So, I think the Braves are really excited about getting him into their system, letting him work with their coaches. And let's be honest, it wasn't always the greatest situation with Kelenic and the Mariners while he was there. So, it's kind of a fresh start for him and a great opportunity because, I mean, if he does well, he could become quickly a part of this team's core going forward.
He could. You mentioned the 5 years of team control that the Braves have. Well, you might not be overly excited if you're thinking, well, 5 more years of a guy who's hit just over 200 at the big league level and struck out over 30% of the time. But those two stats, Chris, they don't tell the whole story of the talent and the potential of Jarred Kelenic. He's absolutely torched the minor leagues. I talked about this on From the Diamond, a 295 career hitter with an over 900 OPS. The power's there. He runs the bases well. He's a good defender. He has a nice arm. I mean, this is a well-rounded player. And when I talked to Alex Anthopoulos and to Brian Snitker about him, they both were really anticipating that opportunity to get Kelenic into the Braves system that you just mentioned, the hitting program, and see if this change of scenery and the opportunity to work with Kevin Seitzer and that crew might just unlock the success that Jarred Kelenic's been looking for over his first 3 seasons or parts of those 3 seasons with the Mariners.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, the Braves have had some success, developing hitters over the years. So, again, he just felt like it was a tough situation with him in Seattle. I know there were some differences early on, as far as when he came up, and a little controversy that swirled about that. But again, I mean, there's no question in the pedigree, and he's had success in the minors all the way up, as you mentioned. So, I just think it's nothing but upside. But I mean, he doesn't have to come here and feel like he has to be, a run producer in the middle of the lineup. If you slot him in left field, you slot him in towards the bottom of the lineup. There's the pressure's off, and hopefully, he can get he can just realize some of that potential that he's shown in the past.
Yeah, he could honestly hit anywhere between 7th and 9th in the order, just depending on how the Braves maybe want to stack righties and lefties with Orlando Arcia, with Michael Harris, with whoever's catching that day, whatever the lineup looks like when you get outside of the, I'll call it the high rent district. It starts with Ronald Acuna Jr., Matt Olson, Austin Riley, Ozzie Albies, etc. And of course, you've got some other big bats in there that you can mix and match. But Kelenic is a really intriguing player. You talked about him being 24 years of age, 5 more years of team control. The Braves, now their outfield, and this was a crazy thing just looking at it, The elder statesman of that group is Ronald Acuna Jr., and I don't know about you, Chris, but that makes me feel rather old.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy to even think about, just with the because it feels like just the other day he was debuting as a 20-year-old, but, I mean, it's just a reminder of just how young this core is, still. So, it is interesting that Acuna's now the, elder statesman out there.
Yeah, pretty crazy stuff. 24 years old is Kelenic. Last year, 105 games. And Chris, you mentioned a little bit of the perhaps, I don't know if controversy is the word, but some of the less than great things that went on during his tenure in Seattle. I don't know if there was a worse one than kicking a water cooler and breaking your foot in the midst of a season in which you were finally starting to show that perhaps you're going to be able to put some stuff together. 105 games last year, 253, 11 home runs, 13 stolen bases. Overall, 38 extra base hits in those 105 games. So he slugged a little bit over 400 and finally seemed to show his ability to, not just have those strikeouts really cause him to be a less than productive big league hitter who might find himself back down in the minor leagues. It just seemed like some stuff was coming together for Kelenic, but the frustrations of the highs turning back into the lows seemed to be a little bit too much for him. And I kind of thought that maybe that was a little bit of a harbinger of things to come. And his tenure in Seattle may be finally trending towards finding him a new home, a change of scenery, and seeing what they can get for him. But the Mariners didn't just give him away. $29 million worth of salary to Marco Gonzalez and to Evan White. And when you talk about young players who didn't, cash in on their potential, Evan White, someone we'll talk about in just a few minutes, was definitely one of those that Seattle was seeing bigger and better things in when they signed him to a deal as a prospect that is going to pay him through at least the next couple of seasons. And there were 3 option years beyond that. But I think the Marco Gonzalez component, Chris, a lot of people were kind of fascinated with what the Braves were going to do in the rotation. How creative were they going to be? Who was going to be able to come in and help that group out? And when I looked at Gonzalez, a couple of years ago, this might have made a lot more sense. But coming off that arm injury, the surgery that he had for the nerve issue in his forearm, and then, of course, the $12 million salary that the Braves took on to facilitate the Kelenic deal, it just didn't feel like he or Evan White were going to be hanging around too terribly long. And we'll talk about the moves in just a moment that have preceded or have followed this trade and have led both of those guys to kind of be pushed off to the side.
Yeah, I mean, with Gonzalez, I did wonder if, he was gonna figure into the 5th starter mix if they couldn't move him, but, at the same time, when you factor in the injury risk, some of his declining skills, you had to kinda wonder if he was, that much better than, some of the internal options that they had, and if they got the opportunity to, send out some of that money that they took on, that it was probably the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it was. The Pittsburgh Pirates were the trade partner for the Braves. It's cash considerations, a player to be named later. That hasn't all been figured out just yet. Seattle, speaking of cash considerations, put $4.5 million toward the $29 million that the Braves took on in that trade. A big chunk of that, Evan White, $17 million over the next couple of years, $7 million for 2024, $8 million for 2025, and then at least a $2 million buyout of the first of the 3 option years that he had. Chris, as Gonzalez goes over to Pittsburgh, which has had a good amount of luck in getting some older veteran pitchers back on track in the last couple of years and getting some useful innings out of them. I don't think the Braves were necessarily in that boat, but they found a partner pretty quickly, which would lead me to believe the cash considerations should be at least, more than nominal to help them get that deal done. Evan White was put off the 40-man roster, outrighted to AAA Gwinnett after he was put through waivers. I really didn't see either of these guys factoring in, and in particular, White, who's come off a couple of hip surgeries and his whole career is just kind of derailed, just seemed to be a contract the Mariners just wanted to have somebody else take care of.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing. The Braves obviously outrighted him off the 40-man roster. Still owed a lot of money. It's unfortunate that, he's been bitten by so many injuries of late, the hip being the biggest thing I think that limited him last year. He just hasn't had a chance really to try to make good on that contract. It's one of the perils of dangers, I guess, of signing a guy before his major league debut. We see the success stories and when they work out, but this is an example of kind of the risk that goes with that type of move.
Yeah, White has not played in the major league since 2021. He had his second hip surgery a year ago. He's played just 30 games in the minor leagues, did win a gold glove in the shortened season in 2020, but he's only a 165 career hitter in 84 career major league games. And injury has obviously taken a big toll on that. But as much as we hear about the Braves making their deals and extending their young players and, whether or not they're really giving fair market value in terms of, these guys aren't free agents when they sign these extensions. And the team does assume a certain amount of risk. And I think that the Evan White deal, which is certainly not going to put any club into the red by any means, but it is a risk and a calculated risk that teams take when they do sign young players before they've truly established themselves at the big league level.
Yeah, no doubt. And I mean, I guess this is the cautionary tale. I mean, we can find a lot of the situations where they have worked out. Of course, the Braves gave Ronald Acuna a contract extension after he debuted. Same with Michael Harris. But, this is always a risk. And, injuries are unpredictable. And, and I don't know that Evan White would have ever figured it out. But at the same time, the injuries have limited his opportunity to figure it out. So, it's unfortunate. It'd be interesting to see if he does play a role at Gwinnett, or if they just move him on off out of the organization at some point. We don't really have any indication of what's in his future.
Clearly, no team was going to take him on waivers, which just lets you know how much the injury has truly been able to sap his once high prospect pedigree. But this is, of course, just one of the many pieces of this 5-player deal. As we look at some of the other ways that this is going to play out, hearing from Alex Anthopoulos, talking to Brian Snitker, this week at the winter meetings, we've heard a little bit about Vaughn Grissom going down to Puerto Rico, where he's playing some outfield, trying to find his way into some playing time because the infield is pretty much locked down. And now all of a sudden there's a new outfielder in this mix. Chris, I think you and I both know the Braves are not going to take on that kind of salary to acquire Jarred Kelenic and bring him in to play every 2 or 3 days. I think that they're looking at him as a guy who's going to get that chance to, really show what he can do in left field on a pretty regular basis. What do you think this means for Vaughn Grissom? And I think that we still have some of the same questions regarding, is Vaughn Grissom still going to be around come spring training? Because there's a lot of winter left for the Braves to perhaps address some of their other needs with a trade that could involve a talented young infielder/outfielder now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I mean, Brian Snicker, in manager fashion, said that they have 30 games at spring training to figure that left field situation out. But I agree with you. I don't think you make this move for Kelenic if you're not thinking that he can at least see the majority of the playing time out there. But you got to also mention that the Braves have still continued to play up Grissom as a possibility of seeing a significant amount of time in left field. We know Grissom's shown the ability to hit. He's probably ahead of Kelenic in that situation. But at the same time, he's got to prove he can play a position that he's never played before. And while I think he's athletic enough to do it, we're just going to have to see how it turns out.
Yeah, and at 22 years old, there's no reason not to believe in that potential. Is still very much there. I mean, we talked a little bit about Jarred Kelenic at 24. He's already been part of 2 blockbuster trades, and he still has a lot of potential that I think would tantalize a lot of clubs. Chris, I don't know that there were that many clubs out there that were probably thinking that he was available or doing that kind of outside the box thinking, but that seemed to be what the Braves were really focused on. And Alex Anthopoulos said flat out, we have pursued one position player this winter. It was Jarred Kelenic, and the Braves got their man. Now, they do still have a starting pitching need coming out of the winter meetings and a desire to upgrade. Alex Anthopoulos talked a little bit about that as well. Even with the salary they took on, I still think that they're in the hunt for that starting pitcher. Just who and when and what the deal will look like, Chris, I think that's the question.
Oh, no doubt about it. And like you said, I mean, if it's a trade, you could see a guy like Vaughn Grissom, on the move, possibly some of their other top prospects. I even wondered if they got Kelenic to try to flip him, for in the right deal for a starter. I think everything's still on the table. As far as that goes, I'm not sure if it's going to be a free agent, if it's going to be a trade. It seems like Dylan Cease is just becoming more and more in demand. When you consider how little he's going to make in 2024, I mean, it just shoots his value off the charts. So I do wonder where the Braves are going to go. I do think they're going to get a starting pitcher still. I think they've still got the salary room to do that. And the pieces, probably a few more pieces now than they had before. So, we're just going to, it's unfortunate we can't predict it, but we're just going to kind of have to wait and see how they approach it.
No, we may not be able to predict it, but we're going to keep talking about it. That's for sure. And as it looked at, all of the fallout from the winter meetings, and Scott Boras was there on the final day as well, doing his normal big media availability. He was asked about Dylan Cease and said, yeah, I mean, it seems like this is something that the White Sox are certainly going to explore, is trading him away. Do about $9 million through arbitration in 2024. One more year of team control beyond that. And as I think we talked about last time, I mean, he'd love to have Dylan Cease. I think a lot of clubs would. I'm sure there's a lot of interest. If the reports are to be believed about the prospect haul that the White Sox are looking for, and they should ask for a lot. No, don't get me wrong. it could be very interesting to see if they do, in fact, find a trade partner for him. But when it comes to the Braves trade and extension success over the past at least couple of deals with Matt Olson and with Sean Murphy in mind, neither of those guys are represented by Scott Boras, so I wouldn't necessarily take it to the bank, no pun intended, that you could sign Cease to an immediate extension if you are able to pull off that trade, regardless of what club it is, Braves or otherwise.
Yeah, you're right, and I mean, and that ideally, if you're going to spend, big name prospects to acquire a pitcher, you're going to hope that you can lock him up for more than a couple of seasons. One of the appealing things about Cease is he is under team control through 2025. There's some other guys on the market that with some injury history, Tyler Glass now, Shane Bieber.
Yeah.
Maybe they would be more open to an extension. That I'm saying that without even knowing who their agents are. So, maybe that's not a possibility either. But at the same time, I just think I think the Kelenic trade shows that the Braves are going to be creative. They may pursue something that nobody's even really talking about. So you just kind of always have to be prepared, just to see where things are going to go.
Yeah, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but we might as well because it's been talked about all winter long. The Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes. There was some discussion about that, and it could happen at any time. He might have signed by the time we're done recording this. I don't know how it's all going to work out. So if this is dated, pardon me, but I did have to bring it up because Alex Anthopoulos was asked about it. He said, I can't talk about individual free agents by themselves, but I can tell you we went after a position player. It was Jarred Kelenic. We went after Aaron Bummer as a reliever. Clearly, they signed Ronaldo Lopez, and he was going, I think, to pretty great lengths to say that not all the reports out there about us are accurate, whether that be who they're being linked to, potentially courting, and also, Chris, the possibility of them trading from that core of 7 players that they've signed to long-term extensions. That was something that Alex Anthopoulos was taking, I think, umbrage with the suggestion that they would just, for the sake of trading those players, maybe make them available in deals for just no other reason than to try to upgrade. And it doesn't sound like that's what the Braves are in the market to do.
No, and I mean I think his exact quote was, we're looking to add, we're not looking to subtract. So I thought that was a pretty
Telling.
pointed message, for the whole roster to kind of look at. And that doesn't, I think to me, that statement, it doesn't even just cover the young core. That covers guys like Raisel Iglesias, Marcell Ozuna, who, may not be considered as part of that young core. Iglesias obviously got that contract with when he was with the Angels. So, I thought that was interesting. I think it's encouraging when you look at where they're at from a payroll standpoint in the luxury tax for the second year, for him to come out and say we're looking to still add to this. Maybe that's probably not going to be a $400 or $500 million contract.
Right.
Unfortunately, but it would be fun if it did happen, but I'm not expecting it.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you can get a lot of good players out there for a lot less than that, and they still have a need in the rotation. So that's part of the reason I'm kind of confident that they're going to do something else before we get to spring training.
Yeah, it does seem like it, and they do have a lot of time. And I will throw this other little caveat in there before we wrap up. If you are going to be in the market to spend $300-400 million on a player, I know Ronald Acuna Jr. is not a free agent anytime soon, but I think you have to at least be considering what kind of deal it's going to take to keep him in a Braves uniform for the vast majority of his career, because I think a lot of people associated with the Atlanta Braves, both in the organization and those who buy tickets to watch this team, would very much like to have as much Ronald Acuna Jr. as they can get over the next decade or decade and a half, however that seems to work out. But otherwise, other winter meetings takeaways for you, Chris, or just pretty much buckle in and see where we go over the final couple of months as we can officially start that countdown to spring training now.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed we didn't get a whole lot more player movement than what we got. But I mean, at the same time, it seemed like the Braves were, in the headlines there for the whole meeting. So, that was something. And, hopefully the dominoes start to fall here soon, because, you're going to blink twice and we're going to be, it's going to be close to February and spring training is going to be right around the corner.
Yeah, I think some teams still have some needs to meet, and I think some players would still like to find a place to play in 2024 and beyond. That'll wrap us up for this edition of BPTV. As always, we appreciate you making time to join us each and every week. We will keep you covered on the hot stove and that countdown to Braves spring training in the middle of February. We'll be talking about pitchers and catchers before you know it, but as all the moves happen, all the rumors, all the speculation, all the things that we can talk about over the course of the winter, we'll have you covered right here. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, enable alerts so you won't miss anything here on the channel. For Chris Willis, I'm Grant McCauley. We will catch you next time here on BPTV.